On October 14, 1944, in the rain-soaked region of Lorraine, France, General George S. Patton remained at his Third Army headquarters as his forces fought through some of the bloodiest and most punishing combat of the European campaign. Relentless downpours had turned the terrain into impassable mud, stalling movement and supply lines. The Moselle River blocked further advance, while the fortress city of Metz continued to resist repeated American assaults. The rapid, headline-grabbing advance Patton had driven across France just weeks earlier had now slowed dramatically, consumed by weather, resistance, and fatigue. That day, Patton received routine intelligence updates outlining German unit locations, supply situations, casualty counts, and weather conditions. Conspicuously missing from these reports was any mention of Field Marshal Erwin Rommel. Surviving documentation indicates that Patton was not formally notified of Rommel's death. He issued no statement, made no diary entry, and offered no recorded comment to his staff. This account focuses on Patton's silence, what he chose not to say following Rommel's death, and why that absence matters. It examines what that quiet response reveals about two of the war's most renowned commanders and the unspoken respect that may have existed between them. Before moving forward, viewers are encouraged to support the channel by liking the video, subscribing, and sharing any family memories or personal stories connected to World War II. With that, attention turns to the events surrounding Rommel's final hours. Earlier that same day, at approximately 12:30 p.m. German time, Field Marshal Erwin Rommel died inside a vehicle on a secluded road near Herrlingen, Germany. Although officially classified as a suicide caused by cyanide poisoning, his death was in reality an execution compelled by the Nazi regime. Accounts from his son, Manfred Rommel, and other witnesses describe how two high-ranking officers from Berlin, Wilhelm Burgdorf and Ernst Maisel, arrived at Rommel's home that morning to inform him he had been implicated in the July 20th plot to assassinate Adolf Hitler. Rommel was presented with three grim alternatives. He could face the People's Court, a process that ensured public disgrace, conviction, and execution, while placing his family in grave danger. He could refuse to comply, resulting in immediate arrest and the same outcome for both himself and his loved ones. Or he could take cyanide, die quietly, and allow the regime to announce that he had died from injuries sustained during a July air attack, an option that would protect his family, preserve his honor, and secure him a state funeral. After considering the consequences and the fate awaiting his family, Rommel chose the poison. He explained the situation to his wife and his 15-year-old son, outlining the impossible choice he had been forced to make. He then dressed in his Afrika Korps uniform, the symbol of his greatest victories. Taking up his field marshal's baton, the mark of his authority and career, he entered Burgdorf's car alongside the officers who had delivered the ultimatum. Within 15 minutes, he was dead. On October 15th, the German government released a carefully crafted announcement designed to mislead the public. It claimed that Rommel had died from severe head injuries suffered on July 17th, when Allied aircraft attacked his staff car in Normandy, injuries said to have worsened over time. Hitler ordered a national day of mourning, and Rommel was honored with a full state funeral befitting his rank and reputation. The German public was told that their legendary Desert Fox had died heroically in service to the Reich, finally succumbing to wounds inflicted by enemy forces. The truth, that Rommel had been eliminated by his own government for suspected disloyalty, was kept hidden within a small circle of Nazi leadership. Some German officers immediately questioned the official account, troubled by the timing and unusual circumstances. Allied intelligence officials also expressed doubts. Despite these suspicions, the official explanation prevailed. Rommel was publicly recorded as having died from wartime injuries, and this version of events was widely accepted in October 1944. Patton received the same information as everyone else, that Rommel had died from wounds sustained months earlier, another senior commander lost before the war concluded. This is the moment when Patton's silence becomes significant. The information available to him came entirely from German propaganda, a story of combat injuries and heroic sacrifice. He was unaware of the coercion, the poison, and the execution ordered by the Nazi leadership. He did not know that Rommel had been forced into suicide under threat to his family or that Hitler himself had sanctioned the act. According to multiple reliable historical sources, Patton made no recorded comment of any kind regarding Rommel's death. There is no official statement attributed to him in military archives. There is no diary entry from October 14 or 15 referencing Rommel, an omission made more striking by Patton's habit of recording his thoughts daily. Patton's surviving diary entries from October 1944 show his attention fixed squarely on the Lorraine campaign. He wrote in detail about weather conditions, supply shortages, and the difficulties of operations around Metz. He described his frustration with slow, grinding combat and his desire for the rapid maneuver warfare he favored. Rommel's death went entirely unmentioned. The same silence appears in Patton's correspondence. He frequently wrote candid letters to his wife, Beatrice, and maintained steady communication with fellow commanders and superiors. Yet among letters written in October and November 1944, none reference Rommel or acknowledge his passing. There are also no recollections from Patton's staff suggesting any reaction. This absence is notable, as staff officers were typically attentive to his remarks and emotional responses. After the war, many of these officers published memoirs or gave interviews discussing Patton's behavior during major events. None recalled him commenting on Rommel's death. Records kept by Patton's press officer likewise show no public statements made to journalists regarding Rommel. Taken together, this complete lack of response stands in stark contrast to Patton's personality. Patton was known for speaking his mind. He openly expressed opinions on nearly every subject, from strategy and leadership to politics and the weather. His speeches were famous for their blunt language and forceful motivation, and his diaries and letters were filled with strong judgments and emotion. Against that backdrop, his silence following Rommel's death remains one of the most telling moments of restraint in his wartime career. Patton's colorful and often profane manner of speaking became one of the most recognizable aspects of his public image. Reporters frequently repeated his remarks, and soldiers who heard him speak carried those words with them. People who knew Patton personally, close friends, family members, and longtime associates, consistently described him as a man who rarely filtered his thoughts and almost always said exactly what was on his mind. Yet when Field Marshal Erwin Rommel died in October 1944, Patton said nothing at all. His silence left no visible mark in the historical record. In fact, that silence itself became the record, clear, complete, and uninterrupted. There was no statement to the press, no diary entry, no letter to his wife or acquaintances, no comment to his staff, no mention during press briefings, absolutely nothing. This absence of response has led historians to raise several important questions. Did Patton simply not care about Rommel's death? Did he overlook the news entirely when it became public? Did he view Rommel's passing as unimportant? Or did Patton speak privately, only for his words to go unrecorded? To understand what Patton's silence might mean, it is necessary to examine the relationship between the two men, what they knew of each other, how they viewed one another, and the broader context of October 1944. Exploring these factors may help explain why Patton chose, or appeared, to remain silent. Despite popular belief, George Patton and Field Marshal Erwin Rommel never actually met one another in combat, a fact crucial to understanding their relationship. Popular culture, especially the 1970 film Patton starring George C. Scott, portrays the two generals as direct rivals who clashed in North Africa. The film's famous line, "Rommel, you magnificent bastard," helped solidify the idea of a personal battlefield rivalry in the public imagination. In reality, such a confrontation never occurred. Some interpretations suggest that Patton and Rommel were engaged in a kind of personal duel, like rival chess masters maneuvering across the desert. However, this scenario has no basis in historical fact. Military archives and official records clearly show that Patton and Rommel were never present on the same battlefield at the same time, never commanded opposing forces in a shared engagement, and never directly faced each other in combat. Rommel commanded the Africa Corps from February 1941 until March 1943, earning his reputation as the Desert Fox through bold raids and tactical successes. Patton arrived in North Africa much later, in November 1942, when he took command of the Western Task Force during Operation Torch and led the invasion of Morocco. After the American defeat at Kasserine Pass in February 1943, Patton assumed command of two corps in early March to rebuild discipline, morale, and combat effectiveness. Official records show that Rommel left North Africa on March 9, 1943, after being recalled to Germany by Hitler due to illness. He never returned, bringing his desert campaign to a permanent end. Patton assumed command of two corps on March 6, just 3 days earlier. For a brief window of 3 days, both generals were technically present in North Africa, each leading separate forces that could have encountered one another. However, no such engagement occurred, and the opportunity passed without confrontation. Battle reports indicate that Patton's offensive operations began on March 17, 8 days after Rommel had already departed for Germany. When Patton advanced at El Getter and drove toward the coast, actions that helped restore American confidence, he was fighting German forces commanded by General Jürgen von Arnim, not Rommel. Although Patton and Rommel never fought directly, they were well aware of one another through intelligence reports and professional reputations. Accounts from both Allied and German sources suggest that each man recognized the other's abilities. Rommel learned about Patton through German intelligence briefings, which regularly assessed American commanders. Captured documents and post-war interviews confirm that Rommel received detailed reports on Patton's leadership and tactics. Rommel understood that Patton led aggressive armored formations and favored fast, decisive offensives, an approach similar to his own. A German intelligence summary from 1944 identified Patton as the most dangerous American general and the one most capable of causing serious difficulties for German forces. German commanders even believed Patton would lead the main Allied invasion at Calais rather than the Normandy landings, a reflection of the respect they had for his abilities. This belief was influenced by Allied deception efforts, but it also revealed genuine admiration for Patton's bold tactical style. Rommel himself acknowledged the effectiveness of American forces. In his letters and post-war papers, released by his family, he wrote extensively about fighting American troops in both North Africa and Normandy, praising their capabilities and adaptability. He admitted that American mobility and firepower were far stronger than German propaganda had suggested. Rommel spoke particularly highly of Patton's 1944 campaign in France, describing it as one of the finest examples of mobile warfare. Such praise was significant coming from a commander renowned for his own mastery of maneuver warfare. However, Rommel made these remarks in August 1944, long after leaving North Africa, and still never encountered Patton in direct combat. Patton, for his part, was deeply familiar with Rommel's reputation and career. Those close to him recalled that he studied Rommel's methods carefully and respected his skill. Rommel's 1937 book, Infantry Attacks, based on his World War I experiences, had been translated into English and circulated among American officers. Patton, an avid reader of military literature, was almost certainly familiar with the book, though whether he studied it specifically before North Africa remains uncertain. The famous movie scene suggesting Patton read Rommel's book was a fictional invention. Still, Patton clearly recognized Rommel as a formidable commander whose aggressive style closely mirrored his own. According to staff officers, Patton often expressed a desire to face Rommel in battle and prove himself against the famed Desert Fox. To Patton, defeating Rommel would have been a defining achievement. One staff officer recalled Patton saying that such a victory would demonstrate that American armored forces could stand toe-to-toe with Germany's best, an idea Patton believed was vital to America's military pride and reputation. The long-anticipated clash between Patton and Rommel never happened. The dramatic duel Patton seemed to seek simply did not occur, and both commanders instead fought other enemies. After the North African campaign, the two generals continued operating in different theaters of war and narrowly missed each other time and again. Patton went on to lead the 7th Army during the Sicilian campaign in 1943, racing across the island in rivalry with Montgomery. Later, after being temporarily sidelined because of the slapping incidents, he assumed command of the 3rd Army in France in August 1944. Rommel, meanwhile, spent part of 1943 in Italy examining defensive positions and preparing for the expected Allied invasion. He was later assigned command of Army Group B in France, where he was tasked with stopping the anticipated Allied advance. Military records show that Rommel was based in Normandy from late 1943 until July 17, 1944, when he was seriously wounded after Allied aircraft strafed his staff car. Later that same month, Patton arrived in Normandy to take over the 3rd Army following the Allied breakout. The 3rd Army officially became operational on August 1, launching what became known as the Great Armored Drive across France. By that point, Rommel was confined to a hospital in France, recovering from his injuries, and he never returned to active command. Once again, Patton and Rommel found themselves in the same theater of war at nearly the same time, yet they never faced one another in combat or led forces directly against each other. Patton's dramatic breakout from Normandy and his rapid sweep across France in August 1944, an advance that earned him widespread fame and terrified German defenders, took place after Rommel had already been wounded and permanently removed from the battlefield. The German officers opposing Patton during August and September were other commanders, men of lesser fame and ability rather than Rommel himself. Patton knew this through detailed intelligence reports that kept him informed about enemy leadership. Archival intelligence records available to the Third Army reveal that Patton's headquarters maintained precise awareness of which German generals were opposing them at any given moment. They knew Rommel had been wounded in July and was no longer in command of any troops. This understanding is essential to explaining Patton's silence in October 1944 and why he made no public remarks. Both Patton and Rommel were legendary figures, celebrated for their aggressive use of armored warfare. Each was controversial, often clashing with superiors, admired by their soldiers, and feared by their enemies. Their reputations made them appear almost destined to meet in battle. The press encouraged this image, presenting them as rival commanders, while soldiers on both sides speculated about who would prevail if they ever fought one another. In reality, however, they never engaged each other in any meaningful way. They never commanded opposing forces in the same battle, nor did they ever have the chance to test their abilities directly against one another. Their knowledge of each other came only through intelligence reports and reputation. While each respected the other's skill as a commander, there was no personal relationship at all. They never met face to face. They never exchanged letters or messages. Records preserved in both American and German archives show no evidence that they ever communicated, officially or privately. Despite being famous generals fighting on opposite sides of the war, they had no direct combat encounters and no personal interaction of any kind. This reality helps clarify Patton's silence in October 1944. When Rommel died, Patton had little reason to comment publicly. They were not personal rivals who had fought famous battles against one another. They were not even true battlefield adversaries in a way that would create a meaningful connection. Rommel was simply one more German general who died in 1944, and Patton had no particular association with him. There was, however, another major reason for Patton's silence. By October 1944, Patton was not thinking about Rommel or any other German commander who was not directly in his path. His full attention was focused on Metz, the heavily fortified city blocking his advance and frustrating his operations. According to Patton's diary entries and military records from this period, October 1944 was among the most difficult and discouraging phases of his wartime experience. After the stunning successes of August, when the Third Army had surged across France at a pace no one expected, Patton's momentum had ground to a halt by October. The cause was logistics. The harsh reality of supply shortages had caught up with his fast-moving forces. Official campaign histories note that by September, the Third Army had advanced so rapidly that supply lines could not keep up. Fuel shortages left tanks immobilized, ammunition was scarce and carefully rationed, and food and other essentials were also limited. The Third Army received lower supply priority than other Allied forces. On September 25, Higher Headquarters formally ordered Patton to stop advancing and shift to a defensive posture. Allied armies to the north, especially Montgomery's, were favored for supplies as Eisenhower prioritized the northern strategy. Patton was instructed to hold his ground and prepare for a renewed offensive in November, when supplies were expected to improve. Patton despised defensive warfare, something well known to everyone around him. His diary entries from this period reveal his belief that halting the advance only allowed the Germans time to regroup and strengthen their defenses, squandering the opportunity created by August's rapid success. He firmly believed that aggressive action was always superior to waiting, regardless of supply conditions. Determined to keep the pressure on, Patton searched for ways to continue attacking despite the logistical constraints. In October, he focused his attention on Metz, the ancient fortress city standing directly in his path. Military planning documents describe Metz as a heavily fortified position along the Moselle River, protected by massive forts built in the late 19th century when the region was under German control. Metz blocked Patton's intended route into Germany. Rather than bypass it, Patton chose to attack the city head-on, even overruling advice from his own staff. Several officers recommended isolating Metz and advancing around it, leaving the garrison to surrender once cut off from supplies. Patton rejected this approach. His staff warned that the forts were too strong and too well built to be taken by frontal assault, and that starving the city into submission would save lives. Nevertheless, Patton insisted that Metz had to be captured by force. He believed that leaving a powerful German garrison behind his lines posed a serious threat to his supply routes and overall campaign. Patton held fast to his core belief that relentless aggression was always the correct strategy, no matter the difficulty or cost, because it maintained initiative and sustained the morale of his troops. He believed that soldiers needed constant action to preserve their combat sharpness and aggressive mindset. Acting on this belief, the Third Army began its advance toward Metz on October 3, according to military records and operational directives, committing several divisions to the operation. That same day, American infantry and engineers launched an assault on Fort Driant, one of the key defensive strongholds protecting the city. From the beginning, official after-action and casualty reports make clear that the operation went badly. U.S. forces were not prepared to fight against heavily fortified positions of this nature. Their training and experience centered on fast-moving, mobile warfare, not static fortress assaults. As a result, they lacked the specialized equipment required for such attacks, including appropriate explosives and flamethrowers. Compounding the problem, American troops had almost no intelligence about the fort's internal layout and effectively entered the fight blind. German defenders inflicted heavy losses, firing from concealed positions unknown to the attackers. After 10 days of costly and unsuccessful fighting, Patton ordered the assault on Fort Driant to be halted on October 13, according to military records. This failure represented the only battle Patton lost during the entire war, a fact that deeply troubled him. The fort itself would not fall until December, after the Third Army had already bypassed it during the broader November offensive. This was the situation on October 14, 1944, the day RML died in Germany, and it helps explain Patton's mental state at the time. He was struggling with the embarrassment and frustration of the Fort Driant failure, which had bruised both his pride and his reputation. The slow advance at Metz challenged his core beliefs about aggressive, fast-paced warfare, and supply shortages further enraged him by limiting his ability to maneuver as he wished. Patton's diary entries from mid-October, filled with anger and irritation, reveal his constant complaints about higher command, logistical obstacles, and relentless weather. Nearly continuous rain turned the Lorraine region into a quagmire. The Moselle River overflowed, making crossings difficult, while roads dissolved into deep mud that slowed vehicles and drained soldiers' strength. Tanks bogged down and became ineffective, even as casualties mounted day after day and hospitals filled. Official casualty figures show that in October alone the Third Army suffered more than 1,200 killed, over 6,000 wounded, and nearly 1,000 missing, making it one of the bloodiest periods of the campaign. This bore no resemblance to the kind of mobile warfare Patton admired and mastered. It stood in stark contrast to the dramatic advances across France that had dominated headlines in August. Instead, the fighting was slow, exhausting, costly, and demoralizing, precisely the type of war Patton despised. Patton was completely absorbed by the situation. Those who worked closely with him noted that he devoted his entire attention to the battle immediately before him. In October 1944, that battle was Metz. His focus remained fixed on Lorraine and the grinding push toward Germany through mud, rain, and resistance. Against this backdrop, RML's death, reported in German newspapers and radio broadcasts monitored by Allied intelligence, was simply another piece of wartime information. While historically important, it had no bearing on Patton's immediate concerns, which were dominated by the crisis unfolding on the battlefield. Another crucial factor explains Patton's silence regarding RML's death. The true circumstances were not publicly known until after the war. At the time, Patton had little reason to question the official German explanation. According to later accounts from German officers and officials, some suspected immediately that RML had not died from his reported combat wounds. The timing raised doubts. His death occurred in mid-October, exactly when purges following the July 20th assassination attempt were intensifying. Medical reports showed that RML had been recovering from injuries sustained in July, yet he suddenly died while hundreds of other implicated officers were being arrested and executed. The Nazi regime tightly controlled all information, suppressing alternative explanations. The official story claimed that RML succumbed to war wounds and portrayed him as a fallen hero. To reinforce this narrative, Hitler ordered a state funeral. German news reports confirmed that the ceremony took place on October 18, 1944, 4 days after RML's death, complete with full military honors. Hitler personally laid a wreath and issued condolences, while Field Marshal von Rundstedt delivered a eulogy praising RML's service and sacrifice. The event was carefully orchestrated to convince the public that he had died honorably. In reality, RML had been eliminated by the Nazi regime to prevent him from becoming a symbol of resistance. Nevertheless, the world was told he had died heroically for the fatherland. Given the tightly controlled information environment, Patton had neither the reason nor the opportunity to comment on RML's death. As a result, he said nothing. The archival record confirms this silence. It offers a definitive answer. Patton made no statement. The historical record is entirely quiet on the matter. In the years after World War II, Patton occasionally mentioned RML in broader discussions of military leadership. Accounts from the late 1940s show that some of Patton's speeches and private remarks, published after his death in December 1945, briefly referenced RML as an example of aggressive tactics worth studying. These comments were passing references, not detailed assessments. Patton himself died just over a year after RML, in December 1945, from injuries sustained in a car accident in Germany, ironically resembling the manner in which RML was officially said to have died. Patton was never directly questioned about RML's death, nor did he address it publicly or privately in writing. His silence remained absolute. The truth about RML's death emerged gradually after the war. Witness testimony, captured documents, and later revelations, particularly from RML's son Manfred, confirmed that on October 14, 1944, RML had been forced to take his own life. By the late 1940s and early 1950s, it was widely accepted that he had not died from combat injuries but had been murdered by the Nazi regime to prevent him from becoming a rallying figure against Hitler.